Hi guys, welcome to today's video. This one is gonna be more about being a client than it is about being a counselor, but I think it will be helpful for counselors as well, so that when you have your clients you can talk about these things with them and they can feel free to express themselves however they want in therapy with you. So keep watching, okay? I think some things are a bit controversial, some things might surprise you, and sometimes I often see my own clients apologizing for swearing or saying, "Can I swear?" And I was like, why does everyone feel like they can't express themselves freely in therapy? Of course, it's a somewhat professional setting, but it's also all about your feelings and however you want to speak and speaking however you want. So I'm going to run through some things that I feel like people might not know or not comfortable with expressing in therapy, and just saying, yes, you're allowed to do it, it's fine. So I'm going to start with the one I've already mentioned, swearing. Swearing is a common thing that a lot of people do and a lot of people are comfortable with. And it just so happens that for some reason when people are in therapy, it's suddenly like, can I not? I shouldn't. Why? And I don't really know what the reasoning behind that is. Of course, even the therapists themselves are allowed to swear, especially if they're quoting something you've said or they're paraphrasing a feeling that you already mentioned and you swore. It's fine, it's acceptable. The thing is, you're both adults. Even if you're not an adult, even if it's a child in therapy and that's how you want to express yourself, go crazy, because there is no rule against how to speak in therapy. There are no rules about what you can and can't say, okay? And swearing is the least of anybody's problems, and it should not be a problem for you as a client to just swear. And even as a therapist, you should not have a problem with your clients swearing, because chances are you probably swear in your own personal life. Of course, it's not like effing this, effing that, like every second you're just swearing. Of course, if that's how you're feeling and you want to express yourself in that way, in that moment, don't ask for permission to swear. Your therapist should not be restricting how you speak and express yourself. So yes, swearing is absolutely okay. You don't have to ask for permission, and you most definitely do not have to apologize for swearing in therapy. It is absolutely acceptable. And if your therapist doesn't agree, send them to me and we can talk about it. I can talk about it with them, okay? Next up is shouting and screaming. Believe it or not, you're allowed to shout, you're allowed to scream. Of course, it's not shouting at your therapist and screaming at your therapist, but if you're finding that whatever you're trying to talk about or express, it requires you to shout and scream, then of course, same with swearing, don't swear at your therapist like they're the issue. No, if you're swearing in general, fine. If you're shouting in general and screaming in general because that's how you feel like you need to express yourself, then of course you definitely can. And to be honest, there are some therapies, one that I read about, there was a book that I read, and in that type of therapy he would purposely try and get his clients to scream and shout as a way of getting in touch with their emotions so that they could actually feel emotions. It was about narcissists. Yes, it was about narcissists. He tried to get them into a place where they could scream and shout, so as a way of allowing an emotional gate to open that hadn't been opened ever or for a long time, where they'd shut down emotions, and screaming and shouting was the best way to get those emotions out. So some therapies, depending on the kind of therapy you're going to, it might require you to shout and scream. And if you're doing role play or you're enacting or doing like chair work or something like that, you might need to shout and scream, and that's perfectly acceptable, especially probably in drama therapy. There might be shouting and screaming needed, so don't feel bad. Even in just regular everyday normal therapy, if you need to do it, as long as it's not at your therapist and you're not like abusing or being threatening to your therapist, then of course do what you need to do so that you can get the most out of your therapy and the money that you're paying for that time. My lecturers have also shared stories of some of their clients who were shouting and screaming about so and so and so. So yeah, it's something that does happen. It's just not spoken about much, and most people don't really go to therapy thinking I can scream and shout, but I'm here to tell you that you can. Yes, next thing might surprise you a little bit. Guess what? You are allowed to stand up and walk around in therapy. You are not glued to the chair, you're not glued to the sofa. You don't have to sit down if you don't want to. And I think it's just nice to be able to, if you feel like maybe you want to walk around and you don't want to sit down, maybe your therapist can also stand up with you. I guess obviously some therapies, like I said, require you to do certain things. So let's say nature therapy, for example, you're outside and walking. Of course, you're both going to be standing up walking. In general, even if you don't feel like sitting down, or you're feeling like sitting down is very stressful for you, you can't sit still, you're fidgeting a lot and you just want to stand up, tell your therapist like, this is what I'm feeling in my body. I just feel like I need to stand up. I want to walk around. Sitting down is not comfortable for me. It's hard for me to sit still and to just be here. So whatever is going to help you get the most out of therapy, express that to your therapist. And if you feel like it's a bit awkward for you to stand up and they're sitting down, you could ask them to stand up as well. As long as they're able to, then I don't see what the problem is. As long as it's not harming anybody, then you should definitely feel free to just be like, actually, I don't want to sit down. I had a tendency when I went to therapy to kind of like take my shoes off and cross my feet on the sofa. That was what was most comfortable for me. And if I go to face-to-face therapy again, that's probably what I would do. If you want to lie down, I mean, I don't know if your therapist would allow you to lie down, but should you wish to, you can ask and say, is it okay if I lie down or sit at an angle or whatever? Then yeah, it's your time and your space. And for me, I found myself just automatically just taking off my shoes and like crossing my legs. It was just the most comfortable thing for me. Okay, next up we have hugs. Now, hugs in general are very controversial, as in we've had lectures speaking about whether it's okay to hug clients or not. And some lecturers are on the fence. Some say yes, some say no, some are in between. And I think the best answer is that it just depends on the client and the client's needs. If it's something that is going to help and benefit the client in the long term or the short term, yes. But it's not something I think should be done every single session. It might be quite normal to give your therapist a hug on your last session together, just to say thank you, or just to show gratitude, just to say goodbye in a way that's not awkward, like, oh, bye, I'll never see you again, and give them a hug. So it might make a lot of sense to kind of just give them a hug on the last session. I don't think there's a problem with that. Some therapists are just like, no hugs under any circumstances. And I think that's not great, because I feel like you should be quite flexible depending on the needs of your client. And I think it's not inappropriate considering you're never going to see each other again. And of course, I think as well, hugs can be necessary and in the best interest of the client if it's maybe an issue that they're bringing to therapy. Physical touch and hugs, maybe they've had issues with that all their life. Maybe they have issues around rejection, or they have issues around not being comfortable with physical touch, but through therapy they get to a place where they're so comfortable with it and they hug you and it's like magical and it's this healing process for them. Then I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So it just depends on the needs of the client. So if you feel like you want to hug your therapist, some therapists might ask you why is that. They might want to talk about it first before they hug you. So just be wary that some therapists are going to be like, yeah, of course. Some therapists might be like, oh, why is that? Let's talk about it first. And for some therapists, it might just be natural. So that one is a bit wishy-washy. You might want to ask your therapist if they're okay with hugs. You know, some people are huggers, you know, some people just love a good hug, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's just one of those things that's definitely in the grey area. And I imagine working with children, hugs might be a bit more common. I don't know. I don't work with children yet, but when I do, I'll let you guys know, hopefully. Children might be more inclined to hugs. It might be more normal. It might be needed. It might be necessary, depending on if the child maybe is coming from a really difficult background where they don't have that physical touch that they need to develop properly. It might be a necessity even. So it's just, once again, case by case. If it's something that you feel like you want, you can initiate that conversation with your therapist if they don't initiate it themselves. So carrying on, I know I look different, but carrying on, you can tell your therapist if they're making you feel uncomfortable. It might be difficult, especially if you're somebody who's very anxious or very scared of confrontation, or you're not very good at being direct. Telling your therapist that they're making you uncomfortable or that they've done something you don't like is going to be difficult. But I assume that you probably have your therapist's email or work phone number or something, and you can always contact them via those methods if you feel like you can't say it face to face. By telling them this, it should help and strengthen your relationship, and it should make things better for you moving forward. You don't have to wait until there's a review to be able to voice how you feel. You should be able to do it anytime, during the session, after the session, whenever, as long as you feel like they've done something which is on your mind, has impacted you. Tell them. Of course, if they respond in a very defensive way, in a negative way, or in such a way that it makes you feel bad, or they start gaslighting you, which, yes, it might seem like therapists could never do such things, but I've heard some terrible horror stories about stuff like that. So if they do get defensive or they're very dismissive of your concerns, then you are very, very free to leave and to find a new therapist. And I would not recommend staying in that situation, because clearly they're not very ethical and they haven't been trained very well, or they're literally just lack a lot of self-awareness and are not very open to criticism, which as a therapist I feel like you should be, because if you've made a client feel a certain type of way, you should want to learn from that. So yes, tell your therapist if they've done something or said something to make you feel uncomfortable. So the next thing you are allowed to do, which is also a bit controversial, is give presents. Some therapists are okay with it, some are not, some are in the middle. And of course, if you're working for a private organization or a company, some companies might have policies saying, you can't accept presents, or if you do accept presents, you have to disclose to us that you received a present, so on and so forth. So some companies might have rules around that which you'd have to adhere to if you're working for a certain company or an organization. But for you yourself, maybe if you're in private practice, it's obviously up to you to decide what's okay, what's not okay, because yeah, like I said, some people are okay with it, some are not. I think for me anyway, if it's like a leaving present, like a thank you so much for all that you've done for me and everything that I've been able to achieve because of our work together, then I'm more than happy to accept a present. But some therapists might say no simply because they're like, oh, it might affect the relationship, oh, it's inappropriate, oh, it's unethical, oh, it's an abuse of power. People say all sorts of things, so it's just up to you as an individual. But of course, you have to be wary if they're kind of like bringing you stuff like every week or every other week. Then red flag, why are you bringing me gifts all the time? It's a bit questionable, and I would probably say no, and we'd probably talk about why you feel the need to give me presents all the time. And of course, it might be attraction that they have towards you and they're trying to win your heart, or they're trying to show that they have feelings for you. It might be that, it might be stuff that they've grown up with, like gift giving is something that they do to keep people in their lives. There might be so many reasons why they're doing it. It's always good to explore and understand why your client is doing what they're doing. And even for you as an individual, why are you giving your therapist presents every week or every other week? I think a leaving present is totally acceptable. Birthday gifts, I personally wouldn't want a birthday gift because you shouldn't even know my birthday. But if it so happens that you know my birthday, maybe it so happens to come up in conversation that I went away for my birthday or I'm going away for my birthday or something, and then you're like, oh, and then you happen to bring me a gift. I personally wouldn't feel comfortable with that. Or if it's like an anniversary present or something, I wouldn't feel comfortable receiving that. But I think it's just one of those things that maybe you talk about if it does come up. And as a client, please try not to be offended if your therapist refuses your gifts. Please don't be offended. They have probably a very good reason for not accepting it. And if you feel like it's going to harm your relationship, or you feel like you're very offended, speak to them about it and talk it through. But yeah, giving gifts is another controversial one. Another thing that's quite normal in therapy is for you as a client to find your therapist attractive or to have a crush on them. It's acceptable to feel what you feel, but the thing is, don't act on it. Don't now start declaring love. Don't now start bringing them gifts. Don't now start messaging them outside of hours. Don't try to now start breaking boundaries, talking about, can I give you a ride home? Or, can we meet up over the weekend? Oh, I've got an emergency. No. You can have a crush, you can find your therapist attractive. It's fine, we're human, your eyes work, you have feelings, it's normal, it's okay. But what we're not going to do is jeopardize your therapist's license and qualification to practice because you want to act on your feelings. And of course, it's up to the therapist to stop that in its tracks and to be like, actually, no, either we have to terminate our therapy relationship, or I have to refer you to somebody else, and so on and so forth. Or we can talk about it and work through it, and we can maintain the boundaries that we have set. Because of course, any therapist's license and qualification is going to be at risk if they pursue a relationship with you. So please don't endanger their qualification for this. And yes, people sometimes often wonder, is it okay to have a relationship with your therapist? Can you? What I've heard generally is no, but what I've also heard is that you can, but only after, as in, listen very carefully. You can pursue a relationship with your therapist and they can pursue a relationship with you, but it has to be mutual first of all. But it can only happen if and only if your therapy together has finished, like you're no longer a client for them, and also if it's been about 2 years post your last therapy session. So if you haven't had therapy with them for at least 2 years, then you can pursue the relationship. That's what I heard, and I can't remember where, but I think it was one of my lecturers or someone somewhere said it. And in that case, it kind of makes sense, because one thing about therapy is that it's a very good environment for romance to brood. It's a very safe and comfortable environment where you are vulnerable and you're somebody who's understanding, and it's just it allows for all of the nice things that you don't normally get in everyday life to happen. You've got exclusive 100% attention from this person who's really attractive, and they're understanding, and they're so caring, and they get you, and they're just so it's okay, and they just like they're like a warm hug, you know. And sometimes they have very nice sweet voices, so it's very easy for that to take place. It's a very easy environment for erotic feelings to develop, but that doesn't mean you act on them. So the reason for them waiting at least 2 years is so that you can see whether it was just a therapeutic environment that caused those feelings, or if those feelings are genuine. And you know, so after 2 years, you've had time to maybe date other people, or you've had time to explore, you've had time to forget about therapy, you've had time to thrive and practice being on your own without your therapist. And sometimes, you know, it's just a dependency on your therapist, it's not really feelings per se. So those 2 years will help you to really be like, okay, I didn't really like my therapist like that. It was just like a temporary thing. It was just, you know, a crush, it was just a fantasy. And then you can leave it there. So 2 years, I think, is a good amount of time to wait. So if after 2 years and you're both still feeling each other, then I guess you can go ahead and do it. But in all honesty, I wouldn't want to. Because even if you're in a relationship, I think the boundaries are just going to be weird. Like, oh, you're my therapist before, like now that person sees me as their therapist forever and ever, and I'm the one who's... What about when I have issues? How can I now come to you and complain and say I've got problems? Like, you're gonna be like, yeah, but you're a therapist. And like, no, it's just too complicated. So that's that for me anyway. The other thing that's okay in therapy is to actually say hi to each other in public if you've both agreed to it. So this is a very fuzzy place, once again, a bit of a grey area. It's a bit of a grey area because some people might want to say hi to their therapist in public, some people might want to pretend like they didn't see you. And in all honesty, I'm the kind of therapist that I wouldn't want to speak to you or acknowledge you in public, just because I want to maintain boundaries. And I don't want you to speak about it when I see you, like, oh, I saw you at the supermarket on Sunday with so-and-so. No, let's pretend we didn't see each other. That's me, that's my cup of tea. But I think it's good to talk with your therapist about whether, if you happen to see each other in public, especially if you live in a small town, even if you don't, you could still run into each other. You know, most people are going to pick a therapist that's quite close for them to commute to, so chances are you probably live in a similar area. So discuss whether you are both okay with like saying hi to each other in public. Are you just going to wave at each other? Are you just going to smile at each other? Or are you just going to walk past each other and pretend the other person doesn't exist? Because at least when you both agree on it, no one gets offended if one of you waves and then the other person just looks away. And imagine if you as a client, you're walking with somebody, maybe your best friend or your boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever you're walking with, and you see a therapist and they come up to you and they say hi, and then your boyfriend or whoever you're with is now like, so who's this? And you're like, maybe they don't know that you're in therapy, or you don't want someone to know that you're in therapy, but their person that you're with is now asking like, who's that? And it puts you both in a very awkward situation. So it's just little things to consider and think about. And yeah, whatever you both agree on, it should be something that neither of you get offended about. And even the fact of, do we want to talk about where we've seen each other in public and bring it into the therapy room? Because like I said, I remember in one of my videos I spoke about how one of my lecturers was out with her daughter and a client must have seen her, and then in the next therapy session I think she was like, oh, I saw you with your daughter and I'm really disappointed that you're a mother. I don't know what that was all about. She didn't tell me anything more, but it's just one of those things where, are you okay to even talk about the fact that you saw each other somewhere and to just acknowledge it, or do you want to pretend like it didn't happen? I remember one of my clients was saying how she had gone to like a book tour or something for the writers of 5 love languages, and I was gonna go, and she said she'd went. And I was like, oh, thank God I didn't go. Because if I'd seen her, I don't know what I would have done. I feel like I would have ran out of there, or I would have done my best to be not seen by her. So yeah, that's something worth discussing with your therapist as well. So in therapy, you are very much allowed to refuse to talk about something. You are very much allowed to say, I don't want to talk about something. You're allowed to change the subject. I had a client before who, when I asked her certain things, she would just be like, can we talk about something else, or can we change the subject? Of course, there's definitely a fine line between like changing the subject and just being avoidant. So I'll get into that. A lot of the time you'll hear your therapist saying stuff like, tell me more. What happened during that time? And in all honesty, you don't have to tell me more. You don't have to tell your therapist more if you really, really don't want to. And that's fine. If you're not ready to share or expand on certain things, we understand. It happens, especially if maybe it's something that you're not ready to talk about, something that you haven't spoken about before. It can be very hard to be open and speak about it. So sometimes it might take a few weeks or a few months for you to get to a place where you can talk about it. That is fine. However, I will say that if it's something that you constantly do that is preventing you and your therapist from actually doing any work and getting somewhere, then you might have to sit back and ask yourself, am I actually ready for therapy? Am I ready to actually discuss these things? Am I actually ready to talk about it so that I can actually move on and heal and work through this thing? Because if you're not, that's also fine. You can take a step back and not go to therapy and wait for yourself to get to a place where you can talk about it, because there's no point in coming to therapy and saying, I don't want to talk about this, and then your therapist changes the subject and you're like, I don't want to talk about that, and they ask you this and you're like, I don't want to talk about that. Like, you don't want to talk about anything, so what do you want to talk about? Because we can't just sit here and just have a chit chat about your day or your week or something that's nothing to do with what you're actually in therapy for constantly, because now that becomes avoidance. It's no longer like, oh, it's just this one thing that I can't touch but I can talk about other stuff. If it's just everything in general and that's the main reason you're in therapy, then take a step back and come back to therapy when you're ready. That is absolutely fine. But at the same time, don't ever feel like you're being forced to talk about something, especially if you've made it very clear to the therapist, I'm not ready to talk about that, but maybe there are other things that you're okay to talk about surrounding something similar or something else. Then you shouldn't feel forced to talk about something that you don't want to. And if they keep prodding and pushing, then like I said before, tell them that it's making you uncomfortable. Tell them that actually I'm not happy with the way that you're trying to make me speak about something I've already expressed I'm not happy to talk about. I can talk about other stuff as well, and we can still work through other things, but maybe just not that specific thing, because it's going to take some time. So that's all. And I hope that this helps. And if you're starting therapy soon, I have a video on how you can prepare yourself for therapy and things that you need to absolutely do before you go to therapy. And I'll have that linked here. So I'll see you in that video. Bye.